The metallic sound of bulldozers tore through the morning silence in Bellbrook, Ohio. Peter Martinez abruptly braked his truck when he saw the devastation in front of him. The neat rows of organic lettuce, carrots, and tomatoes he had grown for 5 years were gone, replaced by expanses of newly planted grass and numbered flags stuck in the ground. "What the hell is this?" he muttered, his heart racing as he jumped out of the vehicle. He had just returned from a 3-week humanitarian mission to Guatemala, where he had helped implement sustainable farming systems in poor communities. Now her own community farming project was destroyed. Nancy Turner, wearing a hot pink golf set and overpriced sunglasses for the early morning, walked towards him with an artificial smile on her red-painted lips. Her heels sank slightly into the freshly laid grass. "Peter, darling. Welcome back. I see you've already noticed the improvements we've made to your property," she said, gesturing dramatically to the makeshift golf course. "Meadowbrook Heights Country Club is now our community's newest leisure destination." Peter felt the blood boil in his veins. "Nancy, that's private property. I never authorized any of this. Where are my crops?" "Oh, that vegetable garden?" Nancy laughed, adjusting her pearl necklace. "Frankly, it was a waste of prime space. Our HOA voted unanimously to revitalize the area. You should thank us. The value of your land tripled." "Voted. I'm the legal owner, and I've never taken part in any vote." Peter pulled out his cell phone and started photographing the destruction. His hands were shaking with anger. "This fed more than 200 children in the school lunch program. We had contracts with 3 schools. Nancy rolled her eyes behind her sunglasses. "Please, Peter, we're a classy community. Golf brings the right kind of people to our neighborhood. Besides, you're 3 months behind with your club maintenance fees." "Fees? What fees? I didn't join any club." At that moment, Regina Alvarez, principal of Lincoln Elementary School, stopped her car next to the property. Her face paled at the sight of the golf course where there used to be a thriving organic vegetable garden. "Peter, what happened? The children are waiting for their weekly vegetable delivery," Regina exclaimed, approaching quickly. Nancy stepped between them. "I'm sorry, but this is a restricted area for members only. You will need to leave." "Members?" Regina looked incredulously at Peter. "What is she talking about?" "This woman and her association invaded my property while I was out of the country," Peter explained, his voice shaking with indignation. "They destroyed the entire vegetable garden to build an illegal golf course." Regina, who was a lawyer before becoming an educator, narrowed her eyes. "Nancy Turner, I presume? I suggest you consult a lawyer immediately. What you've done here amounts to several crimes." "Crimes?" Nancy laughed nervously. "Honey, we're a respectable HOA. We have the autonomy to make decisions that benefit our community." "Autonomy doesn't mean dictatorship," Peter retorted. "You destroyed a social project without the owner's permission. That's trespassing and destruction of property, to say the least." A small group of residents began to form around them, attracted by the discussion. Among them was Harold Chen, an elderly man who always bought Peter's organic produce for his family restaurant. "This is outrageous," Harold exclaimed. "Peter supplies the best produce in the region. My customers come from far and wide, especially because of the dishes I prepare with his vegetables." Nancy began to look uncomfortable with the growing attention. "You don't understand the bigger picture. Bellbrook needs more elegance, more exclusivity. A golf course is exactly what will put our community on the map." "What put our community on the map was Peter's sustainable agriculture program," Regina argued. "We were an example of healthy eating in public schools. 3 schools depend on that production." Peter took a deep breath, trying to stay calm. "Nancy, I'm giving you and the HOA 24 hours to start reversing this damage. Otherwise, my lawyers will be in touch." "That's ridiculous," Nancy hissed. Nancy huffed. "We've already invested over $500,000 in this project. The members have already paid their annual fees." $500,000? Peter's eyes widened. "Where did that money come from?" Nancy's silence was revealing. Regina picked up her phone. "I'm going to call some colleagues at the law firm right now. This needs to be investigated immediately." As the tension grew, more residents came forward. Many were expressing their indignation at the destruction of the community garden. Nancy began to back away towards her golf cart parked nearby. "You'll be sorry you didn't enjoy my view," she threatened, climbing into the vehicle. "And Peter, I expect your fees by the end of the week." As Nancy drove off, Peter looked dejectedly at his transformed land. Years of hard work, of building up the soil, of developing relationships with the community, all destroyed by greed and arrogance. Regina put a hand on his shoulder. "Don't worry, Peter. We'll sort it out. I'm sure there's a lot more to this story than meets the eye. Nancy may have dug a bigger hole than anyone else on this golf course." Harold agreed. "The community is with you, Peter. This woman has gone too far." Peter nodded, determined. This wouldn't just be a battle for his property, but for the very essence of what made Bellbrook special. Its connection to the land and the spirit of community it had cultivated along with its organic vegetables. The morning sun now fully illuminated the makeshift golf course, revealing the true extent of the damage. But it also illuminated the determined faces of the villagers gathered there, ready to fight against the tyranny disguised as progress that threatened their way of life. The morning after the discovery of the illegal golf course, Peter Martinez sat in his kitchen with Regina Alvarez and Marcus Bennett, a lawyer specializing in real estate law whom she had contacted. On the rustic oak table, documents and photographs of the devastation lay scattered like evidence of a crime. "This is more serious than we imagined," Marcus declared, adjusting his thin-framed glasses as he examined the HOA's financial records that Regina had obtained through her contacts. Nancy Turner not only exceeded her authority, there are clear indications of misappropriation of association funds. Peter ran his hands over his tired face. He hadn't slept properly, haunted by the images of his destroyed crops. How did she manage to do all this in just 3 weeks? "I found something interesting," Regina interrupted, sliding a document across the table. The company contracted to build the golf course, Greenscapes LLC, was registered just 2 months ago. And guess who owns it? "Let me guess," Peter sighed. "Nancy Turner?" "Even better," Regina smiled sarcastically. "Bradley Turner, her son. Apparently, our young 23-year-old entrepreneur decided to go into the golf course construction business without any previous experience." Marcus nodded gravely. "That explains the rush to approve the project and the lack of proper tenders. It's a clear case of conflict of interest and possible fraud." A knock on the door interrupted the conversation. It was Harold Chen, accompanied by his granddaughter Jenny, an investigative journalist for the Bellbrook Herald. "Sorry to intrude," Harold said, "but Jenny has uncovered some information that you need to hear." Jenny, a young woman with a determined expression, sat down at the table and opened her laptop. "I've been investigating the HOA's finances since yesterday. Not only did Nancy use the association's money for this illegal project, she also sold club memberships before construction even began." "How much?" Marcus asked, leaning forward. "More than $300,000 in advance fees," Jenny replied. "And the most interesting thing, most of the buyers are out-of-town investors who have never set foot in Bellbrook." Peter felt his stomach turn. "So it's not just about a golf course, it's a bigger scheme." "Exactly," Jenny confirmed. "Nancy is selling an exclusive country club fantasy to wealthy investors, using her land as collateral for a project she had no right to initiate." Just then, Peter's cell phone rang. It was a text message from Nancy. "HOA emergency meeting today at 2 p.m. Your presence is mandatory." "She still thinks she's in control," Peter muttered, showing the message to the others. Marcus smiled for the first time that morning. "Perfect. Let's give her exactly what she wants, an audience." The next few hours were spent preparing a strategy. Jenny compiled her findings into a detailed dossier. Regina mobilized parents and teachers from the schools affected by the end of the organic lunch program. Harold contacted other local traders who depended on Peter's products. At 2 p.m. sharp, the Meadowbrook Heights Community Hall was packed. Nancy Turner, wearing an impeccable executive ensemble, chaired the meeting with her usual pose of authority. "As you all know, we have embarked on a revolutionary project for our community," she began, her voice artificially sweet. "The Meadowbrook Heights Country Club has already attracted significant investment and—" "Illegal investments," Peter interrupted her, standing up. "Just like all construction is illegal." Nancy laughed nervously. "Peter, honey, we've been over this. The HOA has the authority to—" "The HOA does not have the authority to trespass on private property," Marcus interjected, introducing himself as Peter's lawyer, "nor to destroy a legitimate business or defraud investors." Jenny then stood up, handing out copies of her investigation. "Residents have a right to know how their money is being used." Nancy's face began to lose color as murmurs spread around the room. Bradley Turner, sitting in the front row, seemed to want to disappear into his chair. "That's slander," Nancy protested. "You can't." "We can and we must," Regina interrupted, standing up with a group of parents and teachers. 300 children have lost access to healthy food because of your greed. Harold also spoke up. "Dozens of small businesses have been affected. The whole community is suffering to benefit his family." Nancy tried to bang the gavel, declaring the meeting adjourned, but the residents wouldn't budge. Years of frustration with her authoritarian leadership finally boiled over. "I propose an immediate vote to remove the current board," one resident shouted, receiving instant support from the crowd. Marcus smiled discreetly at Peter. "That's just the beginning. Tomorrow we file the criminal and civil suits." Nancy, watching her empire crumble, finally lost her composure. "Don't you understand? I was trying to elevate us, to turn this place into something special." "Bellbrook was already special," Peter replied firmly. "It was a community that cared about sustainability, about education, about small businesses. You tried to turn it into just another playground for rich people." The vote was swift and decisive. Nancy and her board were unanimously removed from office. As she hurried out of the hall, followed by a crestfallen Bradley, the residents were already discussing plans to restore the community garden. Peter watched the scene with a mixture of relief and concern. The legal battle was still to come, but at least the community had regained its voice. Regina approached, putting a hand on his shoulder. "You know what's ironic?" she commented. "Nancy wanted to create an exclusive club so badly that she ended up uniting the whole town against it." "True," Peter smiled, "but we still have a lot of work to do." "One step at a time," Marcus assured. "First, we'll make sure your land is restored. Then, who knows, we might expand the community farming program." As the residents continued to plan for the future of Bellbrook, Peter felt a spark of hope. Sometimes you had to face destruction in order to build something even stronger. The investigation into Nancy Turner's activities revealed a pattern of corruption far deeper than anyone in Bellbrook could have imagined. Jenny Chen, delving into financial documents at the Bellbrook Herald office, uncovered a web of shell companies that extended far beyond Greenscapes LLC. "Look at this," she showed Peter and Marcus, who had gathered in her living room. "In the last 2 years, the HOA has hired 5 different companies for community improvements, all registered to empty addresses and all connected to the Turner family." Marcus examined the documents, making detailed notes. Classic money laundering. Nancy used the residents' fees to hire shell companies, which then returned the money to offshore accounts. "But why risk everything now with this golf course?" Peter questioned, looking out the window at the gray Ohio sky. "She was already stealing from the association for years." Jenny typed quickly into her computer. "I found something interesting in the leaked HOA emails. 2 weeks before you traveled, Peter, the County Ethics Commission began a preliminary investigation into the association's finances. The golf course wasn't the end goal," Marcus concluded. "It was a desperate way to cover up previous embezzlements with a big project that was supposed to justify all the money spent." Peter's phone vibrated. It was a message from Regina. "You need to see this. I'm at the school with some important people." 20 minutes later, they entered the principal's office at Lincoln Primary School. Regina was not alone. Joining her were 2 FBI agents and a representative from the Department of Agriculture. Mr. Martinez, one of the agents, introduced himself. "I'm Special Agent Rodriguez. Your situation has come to our attention because it connects to a larger investigation we're conducting." "How bigger?" Peter asked, taking a seat. "Nancy Turner is not alone." Agent Claire Morrison of the Department of Agriculture explained. "We've identified a similar pattern in 3 other counties, HOAs being used to destroy productive farmland and replace it with luxury developments." "It's a forced gentrification scheme," Rodriguez continued. "Developers identify areas with upside potential, infiltrate local HOAs, and force small homeowners to sell through questionable tactics." Peter felt a knot in his stomach. "So my garden wasn't chosen by chance?" "Your property was perfect for them," Morrison confirmed. "Fertile land, well located, with a history of sustainable use that made approvals for normal commercial development difficult. The only way to achieve the transformation was through extra-legal methods." Jenny, who was furiously taking notes, raised her head. "What about the out-of-town investors who bought club bonds?" "Oranges," Rodriguez replied. "Most of them don't even exist. It's part of the money laundering scheme." Regina, who had been unusually quiet, finally spoke up. That explains why Nancy was so confident. She had the support of powerful people. "She did," Marcus emphasized the past tense. "But now we have enough evidence not only to prosecute her, but to expose the entire operation." A sudden noise in the corridor interrupted the conversation. Bradley Turner, looking much younger and more frightened than his usual arrogant self, was standing in the doorway. "I want to make a deal," he said, his voice shaking. "I know everything. About the developers, about the bribes, about the other places they plan to hit." The agents exchanged meaningful glances. Rodriguez signaled for Bradley to enter and close the door. "Why now?" Peter asked, studying the young man who had helped destroy his years of work. Bradley collapsed into a chair. "Because I realized that my mother won't stop. Last night, I heard her on the phone with the real investors. They're not people to be messed with. And now that the plan has gone wrong, they're threatening to call in their guarantees." Jenny leaned forward. "What kind of guarantees?" "The kind that involves breaking knees," Bradley swallowed dryly. "Or worse." The silence that followed was heavy. Peter watched his antagonist's son, no longer an arrogant villain, but a frightened young man who had become involved in something bigger than he could control. "We need to act fast," Rodriguez declared, standing up. "Mr. Turner, are you willing to make an official statement?" Bradley nodded. "I have documents too. Contracts, emails, recordings of meetings. My mother always taught me to keep it safe from everyone." "Typical," Regina muttered. Morrison consulted his phone. "I have an environmental assessment team ready to document the damage to Mr. Martinez's land. The more evidence we gather, the stronger our case will be." "What about my vegetable garden?" Peter asked. "The schools still need the food." "I've already thought of that." Regina smiled for the first time that day. "While we investigate, we could use the school grounds for a temporary garden. Smaller, but enough to keep the program going until we restore your land." Marcus began organizing the documents in his briefcase. "I'll prepare the subpoenas today. Bradley, your cooperation will make a big difference." The young Turner looked at Peter. "I'm sorry, I really am. I never wanted to. I never thought that." "You can still do the right thing," Peter replied simply. As the group dispersed to begin their respective tasks, Peter stood for a moment, looking out the school window at the playground, where children played oblivious to the conspiracy that had almost destroyed his healthy eating program. The battle was far from over, but for the first time since discovering the golf course on his property, Peter felt that true justice, not just for him, but for the whole community, was within reach. Regina put a hand on his shoulder. "Shall we start the school garden tomorrow?" Peter smiled. "Tomorrow at sunrise. The children can't wait. The news of Nancy Turner's arrest dominated the front page of the Bellbrook Herald that morning. Jenny Chen had written a detailed article exposing the whole scheme, from the money laundering to the connections with unscrupulous developers. The photo of Nancy being escorted out of her colonial mansion, still wearing her characteristic pearls, caused a mixture of shock and satisfaction in the community. Peter watched a group of volunteers working in Lincoln School's temporary garden, their hands dirty with dirt as they instructed the students on the proper planting of lettuce seedlings. The sight of children learning about sustainable agriculture brought some comfort, but his mind remained on his ruined property. "Mr. Martinez," called Sophia, a fifth grader, running towards him with a tablet. "Look what we found in the city archives." Peter wiped his hands on his jeans and picked up the device. On the screen, an old document showed that his property was part of an agricultural historic preservation area established in the 1950s to protect the region's family farms. "That's gold," Marcus commented, approaching with Regina. Not only was the construction of the golf course illegal due to the lack of authorization from the owner, but it also violates historic preservation laws. "And there's more," Regina added, showing her own phone. Bradley handed over recordings of meetings with the developers. They planned to use the golf course as the first phase of a larger project, a luxury condominium that would occupy all the farmland in the county. Peter felt a chill. How many other properties were they targeting? "At least 12, replied Agent Rodriguez, who was approaching with his partner. "We discovered that the HOA was secretly buying options on adjacent land, using money embezzled from residents' fees." Agent Morrison consulted her notes. The scheme was ingenious. First, they devalued the properties through abusive fines and arbitrary restrictions. Then they offered to buy the land for derisory prices before the owners went bankrupt. "Like a form of legalized extortion," Jenny added, joining the group. She was carrying a new folder of documents. "I've just received this from a source in the records department. Nancy didn't act alone. There were members of the city council involved. The group processed the information in silence, only the sound of children working in the garden in the background. Peter watched a little boy carefully explaining to a classmate how to water a tomato seedling without damaging the roots. "You know what's ironic?" he finally said. "They wanted to destroy all this to build a playground for rich people. But look, these kids already have their own paradise right here." Regina smiled. "And they're learning values that no golf course could ever teach them." "Speaking of golf courses," Marcus interjected, "I've received an interesting proposal from the County Parks Commission. They want to turn your property into an educational center for sustainable agriculture as soon as we can reverse the damage." "An educational center?" Peter asked, interested. "Yes," Morrison explained. "It would be a partnership between the local schools and the Department of Agriculture. Their organic growing techniques would serve as a model for other similar programs in the state. And the best part," Jenny added, "the funding would come from fines and asset recovery from those involved in the scheme." Peter watched the children at work again. A small green revolution was happening right there, born from the ashes of a greedy plan. "We have another situation," Rodriguez commented, checking a message on his phone. "Bradley Turner is receiving threats. We need to put him in witness protection." "The people behind this scheme aren't going to give up easily," Morrison warned. "This goes way beyond Bellbrook." "Then let's go beyond Bellbrook too," Peter declared. "Jenny, how much reach does your paper have?" The young journalist smiled. "I have contacts at several larger outlets. A story about real estate corruption, environmental destruction and redemption through community farming? That will go viral." "We need to act fast," Marcus warned. "The more exposure, the more protection we get." The group spent the next few hours planning the next steps. Regina organized a school assembly for the following day, where the children would present their gardening projects. Jenny began preparing a series of reports exposing the whole scheme. Federal agents were coordinating with other jurisdictions where similar schemes had been identified. At dusk, Peter walked among the beds of the school garden, helping the last volunteers to cover the newly planted seedlings. Harold Chen appeared with a delivery from his restaurant, hot soup and homemade bread for everyone who had worked. "You know, Peter," the elderly man commented as they served the food, "my grandfather always said that the best stories are like plants. They need time to take root before they bear fruit." Peter nodded, understanding the wisdom in the simple words. His fight against Nancy Turner and the developers had revealed deep roots of corruption, but it had also strengthened the roots of the community. "And sometimes," he replied, "it takes a storm to show how strong those roots really are." The sun was setting over Bellbrook, casting golden shadows over the small school garden. It was just a beginning, a seed of something greater to come. The battle wasn't over yet, but the community was united, stronger than ever. Jenny Chen's report on the HOA's corrupt scheme went viral nationally, turning Little Bellbrook into the epicenter of a debate about abuse of power and community preservation. The New York Times and the Washington Post had sent correspondents, and news cameras occupied the town's once quiet streets. Peter watched the action from the balcony of Lincoln School, where the temporary community garden was now thriving under the dedicated care of the students. A week after Nancy Turner's arrest, the revelations kept popping up like weeds in a poorly tended flower bed. "Have you seen this?" Regina approached, showing her tablet. 3 more HOAs in the Midwest have been exposed using the same scheme. The FBI is calling it Operation Green Lawn. "Ironic," Peter commented. "They destroyed fertile land to plant golf grass, and now that same greed is exposing a whole rotten system." Bradley Turner, protected in an FBI safe house, had become a key witness. His revelations led to a series of arrests that included 2 city councilmen, a municipal judge, and several real estate entrepreneurs. The young man who had once despised Peter's work in sustainable agriculture now showed a genuine interest in redemption. "Mr. Martinez!" Sophia ran up to them, carrying an official envelope. "It's arrived from the court." Peter opened the document with Marcus by his side. It was the preliminary ruling on his property. Not only did it order the complete restoration of the land, but it also established substantial compensation to be paid for the confiscated assets of those involved in the scheme. "That's just the beginning," Marcus smiled. "The federal judge wants to use your case as a precedent to protect other farms from predatory development." Harold Chen arrived at that moment, accompanied by a group of local chefs. "Peter, we've formed a cooperative. We want to make sure that when your land is reclaimed, all organic produce has a guaranteed destination. Not just for schools, but for restaurants committed to sustainable food." The community's transformation was palpable. What had begun as an individual battle against an overbearing HOA had become a movement for the preservation of Bellbrook's character and values. People rediscovered the meaning of real community, far beyond artificial walls and regulations. Jenny showed up with more news. "The Department of Agriculture has approved the Education Center project. But there's a surprise. They want to expand the concept. Your property will be the pilot project for a national network of sustainable urban agriculture centers." Peter felt the weight of this responsibility, but also the hope it carried. How many other communities can benefit from this? How many Nancys can we stop from destroying something precious? Regina gathered everyone in the school auditorium for a special presentation. The children had prepared a documentary about their experience in the temporary garden, including interviews with old residents about Bellbrook's agricultural history. "Before it was just vegetables," one pupil narrated in the video, "but now we understand that we are cultivating our own history." As they watched the presentation, Peter noticed something extraordinary. The faces in the stands no longer showed the division between members and non-members of the old HOA. There were only neighbors, united by a common purpose. Agent Rodriguez emerged after the screening with a crucial update. "The developers behind the scheme have been identified. It's an international cartel laundering money through real estate development. Nancy was just one piece in a much bigger game." "And Bradley?" Peter asked, worried about the young man who had risked everything to expose the truth. "He's safe," Morrison assured him. "In fact, He's come up with an interesting idea. He wants to use his share of the Turner inheritance to set up a foundation to help communities defend themselves against predatory development tactics. The irony escaped no one. The son of the woman who had tried to destroy Bellbrook's community spirit would now dedicate himself to preserving it elsewhere. At the end of the day, Peter walked to his property for the first time since the restoration process had begun. The machines had removed the golf course, and soil restoration specialists were working to reverse the damage. It was like watching a wound slowly heal. "It will take time," one of the technicians explained, "but the earth has a memory. It remembers how fertile it was before." Regina joined him, watching the work. "Do you know what's most amazing? The children who are learning in the school garden today will be the guardians of this land tomorrow." "And so much more," Peter added, watching a group of students approaching with seedlings in hand, eager to take part in the restoration process. The story of Bellbrook was no longer about a battle between a corrupt HOA and an organic farmer. It was about a community rediscovering its roots, literally and figuratively. It was about ordinary people coming together to protect something precious, not just the land, but the values it represented. As the sun set over the recovering fields, Peter realized that Nancy Turner, in her blind greed, had inadvertently planted the seeds of something far more valuable than an exclusive golf course. She had planted the seeds of community renewal, justice, and hope. And those seeds, like all the others Peter had cultivated over the years, were only just beginning to sprout.